As was said, I come from Charles University, and because university is really old, being founded in 1348, I will lead you through the history. Oh, sorry. So, when Professor Wessels gave his introductory speech, he spoke and he explained the life cycle of narratives. He spoke first about the first stage of apprehending narratives, and it was their framing. When framing our understanding who are we formulate a social construction. We construct reality and our history, our place in the world and our images of that world. Narratives thus have their own life, based in zeitgeist, justifying actions or passivity, mobilizing or demobilizing, dependent who controls, the mental maps of who would like to control. And the lecture will concentrate on one of the youngest states of the EU, the Czech Republic, which was founded in 1993, but priding herself with a very long history. The first part of the lecture will be devoted to three narratives: Czech messianism, the victim narrative, and grown-up narrative. And the second part will be dealing with the current debate or the absence of the debate of narratives after 1989. I will argue that the mixture of the two narratives, messianism or a victim, continues to be reproduced in current debates and creates a permanent feeling of suspicion and sense of a society under the threat of deprivation of independence, as well as the persuasion that the Czech, at certain crucial historical moments, had it or wanted to have it right, but someone else spoiled it or destroyed it. Europe is thus perceived not as us, but others. On the other hand, there always was a rational, substantive, pragmatic narrative referring to overarching human values and appealing to Czech society as a society of responsible grown-ups who are equal partners in Europe. The Czech national narrative is a combination of messianism, a belief that Czechs are predestined to serve as a model, as we heard also in Finnish case, for other nations, let it be right religion, Hussite movement, Czech Reformation, or democratic humanism, the Czech national revival of the beginning of 19th century, island of democracy in Europe after the formation of independent Czechoslovakia, Prague Spring 1968, and the legacy of socialism with human face, or a champion of transformation after 1989. On the other hand, Czechs are living national trauma, from which arises the victim narrative, based on a strong belief in being abandoned, betrayed, or misunderstood. The result is defeatism and lack of self-confidence caused by historical experiences of betrayal, be it the death of Jan Hus, one of the founders of the Reformation, who was burned to death in Constance, the Battle on the White Mountain, 1620, and its consequences, the Munich Agreement and the occupation by Nazi Germany, Yalta Conference, Communist Coup in 1948, or the occupation by Warsaw Pact countries in 1968. the perception of the other or outside world, which is either supposed to recognize the Czech role as a messiah or which betrays, is predetermined by the dichotomy of these two contradictory tensions. The first is leading Czechs towards unrealistic expectations, and the second one is pushing them towards apathy and skepticism. My argument is that beside these two big narratives, there is a third undercurrent, unemotional, rational, factual, and pragmatic. That one is based on hard work and responsibility, rooted partially in Czech Protestantism and constructed on the effort to put Czech society on equal footing with other developed nations on the basis of culture, humanism, and respect to others. I call it the grown-up narrative, and its protagonists would be countless. So let me take you through the history. Czech Republic is geographically based in the heart of Europe, like many other countries claim themselves to be the heart of Europe, but this is one of them. The relatively small countries experience ups and downs of the continent and looks with the suspicions to any challenges coming from abroad. The writer Milan Kundera spoke about non-obvious or no self-evident nations compared to obvious and self-evident European nations. Non-obvious nations have to struggle for their survival and permanently prove their raison d'être during the periods which are marked by the times of falls and takeoffs. Historically, the country belonged to Western Christianity. Wolfgang Wenceslas spoke in his lecture about the construct of self-perception of nations and symbols, which have a testifying value. The symbol of Czech value, of Czech statehood, is the good King Wenceslas. This is a picture from Wenceslas Square, and you will see the picture several times during the lecture. An educated man and dedicated Christian from the ruling Přemyslit family, who was murdered by his brother in the year supposedly 935, he was canonized and became the patron of the country. King Wenceslas is thus embodying both. He was a messiah, devoted Christian, and a good king, but he became a martyr and a victim. The medieval kingdom of Bohemia experienced its bloom under the late Přemyslit kings in the 13th and the Luxembourg House in the 14th centuries. Especially under Charles IV, the kingdom flourished, and Charles University is the proof. So you see Charles IV, who is giving the founding documents of Charles University, and many of you visited Charles University, so remember Carolinum, the main aula where the statue of Charles IV is placed. There were Czech lands which at the end of 14th and beginning of 15th century became a cradle of reformism. Jan Hus, a follower of John Wycliffe, and the inspiration for Martin Luther and the Hussite movement placed Czech lands at the head of the Reformation. So you see pictures from the battle between Hussites on left side and Crusaders on the right one, and Jan Hus being burned in Constance in 1415. Czech Protestant aristocracy was an important player at the outbreak of 30 Years' War in 1618, but the lost battle between the Protestant Union, a military alliance of Protestant German states and Roman Catholics, led by the Habsburgs, on the White Mountain in 1620 resulted in the abolition of the Czech constitution and established Habsburg rule until 1918. On the picture you can see the execution of 27 representatives of Protestant aristocracy, including the rector of Charles University, Jan Jesenius, who were beheaded at Old Town Square in Prague in 1621. Czech elites, several thousands of people, were either expelled from the country or stripped of their property. Recatholicization and Germanization started. Several times in Czech history, the country was deprived of her elites. In 1938, 1948, 1968. Modern society was formed during the 19th century. At the beginning of Czech national revival, the thinking was inspired by the ideas of German, English, and French Enlightenment of 18th century, and also Herderian nationalism. The notion of Europe was still quite vague. The turning point vis-à-vis Europe represented the year 1848, the year of many revolutions all around Europe, pleading for more rights for middle class who wanted political rights to follow from the rising economic potential, as well as for more freedom and independence to the nation without their own state, the non-obvious or non-self-evident nations. So what you see are barricades and revolution in Prague. Up there is Prague Castle. František Palacký, the most influential Czech politician and historian of the 19th century, was invited to the Frankfurt Parliament to represent the Czech lands, and he wrote his famous letter to Frankfurt in 1848. He rejected participation of the Czech nation as a potential part of a united German state. He stated that if there were no Habsburg monarchy, we would have to invent it in order not to be drawn into a German or a Russian sea. At the cornerstone for statehood, Palacký proposed not a national principle, but the ideas of freedom, equality, and brotherhood for all nations. Czech messianism glowed from the main motto of the Congress of Slavic Nations held in Prague in 1848, the Manifesto to European Nations, inspired mainly by Palacký. Czechs were full of feelings of having a mission to transmit the ideas of European humanity to other nations. In the second half of 19th century, industrialization succeeded in creating a modern Czech society, a third of which was German-speaking. Comparable with other European counterparts, Czech lands produced 2/3 of all industrial production of Habsburg monarchy. The developed social structure found an expression in a political one. Numerous and self-conscious intelligentsia, modern bourgeoisie, working class and rural population created political parties and many associations and clubs protecting their interests. The important role vis-à-vis Europe played the representatives of Czech culture. Program of some of them was to catch up with Europe. Politics and culture were merging. Culture was politics of a small nation. Culture was proving the existence of the nation and making it visible. After Palacký, Masaryk was the outstanding architect of Czech moral rearmament. Masaryk gave the small Czech nation a great idea and a clear orientation. The history of the Czech nation, he taught, is a meaningful part of world history. the Czechs deserved recognition as the carriers of universal values in view of their struggle for spiritual freedom. Palacký and Masaryk, they both work on framing the grown-up narrative as they encourage their compatriots to behave like adults, to deserve to be considered as equals. So we are getting close to the end of Habsburg monarchy. Masaryk's idea of the further development of Europe and world in general was the belief in the unification of Europe. He had in mind a system of treaties between individual states, a loose confederation. Masaryk grounded the Czech debate into understanding the legacy and the sense of Czech history in humanist principle. An independent Czechoslovak republic was founded in 1918 as a liberal, multifunctional, multi-ethnic democracy of Czechs, Slovaks, Germans, Ruthenians, Hungarians, and Jews. Multi-party parliamentary democratic republic with developed party system and civic society belonged to 7th place as to the industrial production per capita in the world. So this was again St. Wenceslas and the proclamation of independent republic. And when speaking about industrial production, I have to mention Škoda cars. So the Škoda bought Laurin and Clement in 1925 and the factory was established. The expanding export-oriented economy was severely hit by the economic crisis in the 30s. The neighboring Nazi Germany started to expand. The Munich Agreement in 1938 deprived Czechoslovakia of her borderlands. On March 14, 1939, a Slovak independent state was formed under the auspices of Hitler, and the Nazis occupied the rest of the country one day later. The betrayal of France and Britain, the main allies of a young democratic but still fragile republic, caused a wound. 6 years of German occupation ended by the liberation by Red and American armies in 1945. A short attempt to revive democratic republic with the President Edvard Beneš, former Minister of Foreign Affairs under Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk and later a pre-war president, was interrupted by a communist coup in February 1948. New waves of immigration from the Republic followed in the years 1948 and then again after 1968, when Prague Spring was suffocated by the armies of the Warsaw Pact led by the Soviet Union. A grey period of normalization followed. So again, Wenceslas Square and Soviet things. The fall of communism in 1989 was marked by the slogan, "Back to Europe." The main meaning was that Czechs are Europe. They contributed to and shared her values, her complicated history, culture, and heritage. In practical terms, it meant the full membership in NATO and the EU. Coming to current debate, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Czechoslovakia was again a champion. The wave of messianism made the state to be at the limelight of news, showing a cultivated velvet revolution with President Václav Havel on the head, and After that, it was followed by a velvet divorce, and the country split into two, Czech Republic and Slovakia. Contrary to self-perception, the Nazi occupation and 40 years of communism took their price. The primary thesis maintains that the transformation and accession towards the EU were interconnected, but led to a dichotomy between an unfinished revolution of modernity in Czech society and the accession to a postmodern entity that the EU represents, causing shifts in attitude. The tension pushes the Czech debate from the grown-up narrative of constructive participation towards instrumentalized messiah or victim narratives. The rift between the bearers of the three narratives could be compared to the cleavage between supporters of an open and closed society. The prior, the open society, is represented by the supporters of liberalism and democracy supportive of European integration. The latter promote the idea of an ethno-national state and oscillate between messianism and victimhood. Since after EU accession, the Czechs are no longer stars. They paint themselves as victims of either big states, Germany, Macron, or most of all, the Brussels bureaucracy. The cleavage runs through society as well as through political parties. The main protagonists of the European debate were Václav Havel, Václav Havel, the Czech president, Czechoslovak and then Czech president, and Václav Klaus, economist and politician, former prime minister and then president. Václav Havel, for him, Europe was a union of values, commonly shared values of democracy and respect to human rights, and common culture of life. And European identity and national identities were for Havel complementary. Czech were supposed to share responsibility for European destiny, contributing to and creating a common space as suggested in his famous speeches in the European Parliament or French Senate. Václav Klaus, on the other hand, stressed the role of free market. At the beginning of the 90s, as a representative of the state, Klaus rejected Visegrad cooperation as he feared that it may slow down the process of the accession. And he encouraged the split of Czechoslovakia and was proud to be the father of an economic reform, of quick privatization, and the role of the Czech Republic as an economic tiger of Central Europe. After economic difficulty in 1996, as well as due to the slow accession process, concentrating mostly on technical issues of adopting acquis communautaire, losing a position of an economic miracle, Klaus's enthusiasm started to fade. I just shortened the presentation about him, but now he is a big supporter of German AfD party, and together with his son, who was recently expelled from Civic Democratic Party, conservative party founded by Klaus Sr., they would like to form a new political party who is based on Euroscepticism. What is the perception of Europe on the eve of the elections to the European Parliament among Czech political parties, and how are major narratives influencing their positions? So I am showing here parliamentary political parties. They're according to number of seats they have got in the parliament. There is a coalition government of ANO, what means yes, political party, which is led by multi-billionaire Andrej Babiš, and then Czech Social Democratic Party being supported by communists. As you see, when I was preparing my lecture, what was during Easter holidays, and then now, so at that time, there were only some political parties who already were displaying their political manifestos for the European elections, and the only one having really very substantial manifesto is Civic Democratic Party. The party which used to be Eurosceptic, but fortunately after Klaus was expelled, is becoming more Euro-realist. And then if we look at political parties, so in fact there is only one political party which would like to leave the EU, and this is Freedom and Direct Democracy Party, which is close to Le Pen and Salvini. And so they are seeing the Czech Republic as a victim of the EU. But looking at other parties, so the governing ANO party is either victim of big ones, of Brussels bureaucracy, or messiah. We are going to show them how to do that, or we are right, we know the right way. Regarding the grown-ups, so it's more the Civic Democratic Party, or there is a party of young professionals, Pirate Party. They are becoming more and more popular, especially among young people or students or professionals. They are more a liberal party. And then it's interesting that even Czech Communist Party doesn't want to leave the EU, is showing the EU more, or our position, as a victim, but there is some rational vision of the society as well. So I have got two pictures for you from the campaign. The campaign is very weak. It's not so visible, but you can see this SPD, the party which would like to leave, and there is a poster, Czech Republic First, together against the dictatorship of the EU. And so there are these nationalists. The nationalist on the left is the leader of the party, Tomio Okamura, with a very Czech name and Japanese father. And they hopefully will not have a big support. And this is the Czech Prime Minister who copied his cap from President Trump. And what is said there is strong Czechia. And so you see, we are Messiah. We are strong and we know the way. And if we are not right, then we are the victims. So, unfortunately, the fact that besides Havel, there was not an influential protagonist of Czech membership in the EU, that many politicians were playing blame game, what we know very well from other member states, blaming Brussels constantly. Then, if we look at the support for the EU, unfortunately, we see that it's going down. And Also, mass media are playing the role, also fake news, then web pages of very uncertain origin, which are very active, and trolls, which are very active in the country, then are influencing public opinion. To conclude, and I conclude, but I wanted you to have a look at the picture because it is again from Carolinum, and there is a Charles IV kneeling in front of St. Wenceslas. So, Czech history of a country placed in the indistinct region of Central Europe, personifies the complicated and complex stoginess of uncertainty and temporality, with several islands of stability constantly tested. World War I and the foundation of Czechoslovakia in 1918 ended 300 years of the rule of Habsburg monarchy. The 20th century witnessed German and Soviet occupations and 7 regimes. The joy of regaining democracy was marked by the loss of Czechoslovakia in 1993. During her history, 3 major narratives were constructed and revived in different forms. They corresponded to the hardships of self-identification and identity of Czech non-obvious nation who was facing losses of independence, mythologization of its own history as a mobilizing factor, provincialism and anti-elitism. The narratives of Messiah or a victim have a strong emotional and self-centered content. They are accompanied by pride and naive self-perception and self-pity. Czech society, deprived several times of its elites, is plebeian, democratic but suspicious. The grown-up narrative, constructed by the representatives of the elite, Palacký, Masaryk, Havel, is rational, active, mobilizing, and open to learn and show responsibility. The aim is to anchor the non-obvious nation in Europe of self-confident member states, bounded by rules framing their mutual relations. Europe thus is a point of reference and a purpose. Current political debate on the eve of the elections to the European Parliament is very weak. Parliamentary political parties mostly support the membership in the EU and oscillate between victim and grown-up narratives vis-à-vis Europe, not omitting to air their persuasion that they have a receipt for the necessary reform, either the Prime Minister or Klaus. To conclude, I would like to quote a peer and rival of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, Josef Pekář, a historian and former rector of Charles University. He wrote in his essay The Sense of Czech History, "We can find out in the flow of our history a lesson that where the flame of patriotic love went forward and united with educational and moral progress of Europe, we grew to be big. When it was fading or disappearing, we were dying. I wish that the flames of patriotic love of all Europeans unite in Europe." Thank you for your attention.